Hey guys, what's up? It's 412 Sports Cards here today, back with another video. And today I'm going to be talking about investing in sports cards with a fantasy manager mindset. So I've been thinking about cards a lot recently, and I've come across a couple deals in my head that all kind of can be condensed down into this common theme of relating to fantasy a lot. And I'm not going to be out here telling you that all the best players in fantasy are the best investments, and that's very far from the truth. I mean, look no further than the example of Andre Drummond, who's like a top fantasy player, and his 2012 Prism PSA 10 going for $90, and then a guy like Brandon Clark, whose PSA 10 Prism goes for about the same. Obviously not the same caliber of fantasy player, but that's just what rookie hype will do for you. Obviously, that's not what I'm here to talk about, and I got 3 points for you today on how you can bring a fantasy mindset into your sports card investing, and let's get right into it. So, number one, identifying the positions that matter the most and then prioritizing them. So in fantasy football, you often hear people saying that a good running back is essential to your squad. And in the first and second rounds of those fantasy drafts, those running backs are going off the board fast. Now, I'm primarily a basketball investor, as you guys know, but I tend to apply this principle of fantasy almost in reverse of as much of the hobby does. And what that means is, instead of like in football where you're prioritizing running backs in fantasy, I kind of apply that principle in reverse and understand that the hobby does not prioritize centers. So we'll show off some cards of some centers here to get some points across. Now, for one reason or another, the hobby's never really given a ton of respect to centers. It's probably they aren't racing across the court, they aren't slashing to the basket for dunks most of the time. You know, they're sitting under the basket and dunking, but they're not raining threes either most of the time, and they do a lot of the dirty work on the court, and because of it, they don't see the hobby love. And I think a great example of that is Bam Adebayo. Bam is a premier rim-protecting big in the NBA right now. He's offensively efficient as a center, and he's made huge strides in the bubble on his offense, and he's posting even higher shooting efficiency and rebounds this year than he did last year. So he's not only a premier rim-protecting big who is efficient offense, but he's a improving one, which you'd think would bode very well for his card prices. But then, I mean, he's definitely a top-tier center. And then you got guys like Donovan Mitchell, who, first of all, I guess I should say, his Prism PSA 10 is going for about $290, whereas then you got someone like Donovan Mitchell, whose PSA 10 Prism is going for $360. And that's after Bam has shown promise this year and has shown improvement on the offensive end to go along with his excellent defense. And Donovan Mitchell struggled a lot this year, to be perfectly honest. And I understand that Donovan Mitchell's been in the eye of the hobby a little longer than Bam has, who came onto the scene a little bit more last year. But they're from the same draft class, and with the fact that Bam's been improving and Mitchell's been struggling, it really shows the bigger leash that the hobby gives to guards and guard card prices, and how afraid they are of, showing respect to rim protecting centers, especially ones who don't stretch the floor. So kind of that idea of there are positions that are less important than others. There are positions you should be avoiding in your card investing. They're just not worth as much, and that's where the rim protecting big is in today's market. If you're still with me on this video, I'd really appreciate it if you go drop a like, drop a sub. It really helps me get more content out, and it really means a lot to me. So if you don't mind just doing that, I really appreciate it. But anyways, on to point number 2. Identifying the qualities that matter most in your players and prioritizing them. So this kind of builds off the last point, and I'll start showing off a little teaser here. Trae Young kind of builds off the last point. Basically, in fantasy scoring, there are certain categories and certain actions, right, that provide more value. For example, football in a PPR league, a receiving running back is going to rack up a ton of points. And in basketball, 3-pointers and assists create a lot of value for a player in fantasy. And it's good to be targeting those guys in your drafts because of it. The same principles apply to card investing. There are certain statistical components and certain aspects of a player's game that you want to be looking for when you're investing. So in the hobby, for basketball cards, which is what I talk about most of the time, we're looking at 3-point shooting, for example. And it's a lot of the reason that like a guy like Trae Young is loved by the hobby. His defense, atrocious. He's small. He can't play. He's one of the worst defenders in the league, but he can shoot that 3 ball. And you know what he can do? He can make 3-point highlight reels, and that does a ton for your hobby. And the hobby also loves guys who can like do stuff like make highlight reels by throwing down monster dunks. Looking at like Ja and Zion, they're the highlight reel players. This is what the hobby likes. This is what the hobby likes to devote money to. And as an investor in the marketplace, you should be aware that like these highlight reel type plays, much like how some statistical categories matter a ton in fantasy, it's certain type of plays that matter a lot for players' card prices, and that's something that you should be thinking about. And when you got players like, it's kind of interesting, you get players like Kawhi, who are masters on defense, honestly not that dissimilar, and I'm not saying Bam is Kawhi, but Bam is a premier defending big. And when you get these guys like Kawhi that are masters on defense and have a killer mid-range game, I mean, you don't get that much hobby love. No one cares that much in the hobby about defense. It's just not as attractive. And you aren't seeing people out here loving the mid-range. They want those threes. That's what the people want to see. And his cards did balloon in the bubble up to like 6K for a Prism PSA 10, but they've fallen to 2K. And as a lot of the market has rebounded, those are kind of stagnant. They're not moving as much. And he's been playing decently well. And they're still not moving. And I think that it shows that in short, being able to make plays that land you on highlight reels, on offense particularly, they matter a ton for your hobby relevance and price growth. This moves us to point number 3, which is my big one, the one I was really excited to give. Owning the handcuffs of your speculative plays. So when you guys are when you're doing a fantasy football draft, say you draft like a top running back in the first round. In those late rounds, you want to draft their handcuff, which means their backup. So if the starting running back that you drafted early goes down, don't worry, you've secured the backup who's going to get the increased usage and will instantly become a much better and much more productive player than he would be with the starting running back in. Kind of hedges your bet against an injury to the starting running back, the star of your team, helps you mitigate some of those losses if they get injured. The same thing can be done in prospecting in the card hobby today. And a great example of this right now is Markelle Fultz. Fultz was trending up this year until he tore his ACL, which was honestly really sad to see. And he's sidelined for the remainder of the season, obviously. Now, what did this do? It opened the door up a little bit for Cole Anthony to get more playing time. And at least on Star Stock, his cards went up a good amount. And the same is true for Dwayne Bacon. Obviously, these are lesser-known guys. And even if they aren't getting a massive minutes boost, the scoring production of Markelle Fultz needs replaced, right? And hobby thinks maybe these backups are the guys who are going to get some of that production. These guys who maybe played alongside Markelle Fultz might be getting more production. In a reactionary card market like this, they're going to go up. And if you're a smart investor, you're taking a really risky play in someone like Markelle Fultz, doesn't hurt to hedge a little bit, right? Get some of those handcuffs, get some of those backups who will benefit if he were to be injured. It helps. They're cheap too, and they see massive increases fast upon injury, and it helps offset some of that risk. Another example, just showing off some cards that I've got. Guys like Cam Reddish and Kevin Huerter, for example, might be decent handcuffs. Like Cam Reddish has been starting a lot, but if you're investing in Cam Reddish, he's relatively risky, right? Like he's a younger guy. Maybe you want to own just a little bit of Kevin Huerter. Who's a solid player, comes off the bench, actually gets a lot of minutes for a bench player. That is worth noting here. But should Cam Reddish get hurt, no doubt that Kevin Huerter would be moving into that starting lineup, and that would definitely be good for his card prices. So maybe if you're speculating on Cam, you could set aside a little bit for a guy like Kevin Huerter to help offset some of that risk. And there are tons of plays like that, right? But these are just some ideas. And anyways, that's it. I hope this helps shed some light on some important ideas and maybe in like a fun way is what I was thinking by comparing it to fantasy. But anyways, if y'all like the video, drop a like, drop a sub, and I'll catch you next time.